Hi, so today I'll be talking about how we can treat mental illness in juveniles before it affects them negatively in adulthood. So, juvenile delinquency is not something new, it has been around pretty much forever. And it's many parents' worst nightmares to find out that their child has committed a criminal offense, whether it be a misdemeanor or a felony. And it makes it worse if it's a felony. And in today's society, it seems that it's a growing trend that we see in news and media outlets of stories of children being arrested for crimes that they have committed. In the past couple of decades, it seems that there have been more school shootings too, with the suspect being under the age of 18. And these are more prevalent than ever, or than the early 1900s. And at first, most people usually point to gun control as the issue and how parents store their guns at home. But there's usually an underlying factor to what provokes a child to go haywire. And the answer to why juveniles become delinquents is mental health. Mental illness itself is a huge problem in today's society. Society is facing. It's harder to diagnose someone with a mental illness given that there are not enough institutions to help treat or diagnose people. With this inability to properly screen and treat children with mental health, these issues usually go under the radar until it's too late. Um, there are some solutions to this ongoing issue that we currently face. Finding effective solutions sooner rather than later will deter and decrease juvenile delinquency substantially. In modern day America and around the world, juveniles who commit unlawful there are juveniles who commit unlawful acts on a daily basis. Um, Many criminal acts seem to stem from mental illness, but we can make a difference by finding solutions to screen these children before they snap and direct them on the correct path in life. So each year, about 2.1 million adolescent children are arrested for criminal offenses, and out of those 2.1 million, about 1.7 million of those cases are thrown out once they get to juvenile courts. But for the remaining of those cases, that aren't thrown out, they are usually serious crimes such as murder, rape, robbery, and so on. And these crimes usually cause delinquents to serve time in the system, or it causes them to get community service as a charge. And another reason why courts may choose to send juvenile delinquents or send a juvenile delinquent into the system is because they need the mental health services that they can't find outside in the outside community. And if it's not obvious a child has a mental disorder, they're often provided with a mental health assessment once they arrive to court and prior to entering facilities. And these assessments don't always work and they're not always accurate like how they're supposed to be. Also, juveniles can be reluctant to comply with the assessments, and therefore they may not be properly diagnosed. But for the most part, a majority of these juveniles can be diagnosed correctly with a correct mental illness. But unfortunately, many of the mental health services provided in the juvenile system are often inadequate and they don't really work. So ironically, the goals of these institutions is to rehabilitate and to prevent juveniles from recommitting when they're still a minor or even when they reach adulthood. Mental health evaluations occur in detention facilities because the Juvenile Justice and Prevention Act of 1974, which goals were to divert the youth from the punitive processings. And although screenings take place in facilities, those facilities can also pose as threats to these juveniles, such as one threat is solitary confinement. The consequences of the consequences of negative acts juveniles commit while they are in lockup causes them to be sent to solitary confinement. And this is a form of punishment that causes children to get more mental illnesses such as like anxiety. And approximately 2 million youth who are arrested, 70% of them already have mental illnesses, and this percentage can mean the majority of the 600,000 to 700,000 youth who are serving time in correctional facilities have mental disorders. So therefore, using such a extreme punishment like solitary confinement against children will have a negative impact on them. And the impact of solitary confinement is also negative to the child's development because it can also increase the risk of self-harm such as suicide. So taking the extreme measure of locking up children as a punishment to keep them away from harming society is not the way the justice system should act towards them. Solitary confinement should not be an option in youth detention facilities because it doesn't help them rehabilitate. It only makes their conditions worse. And once a child is thrown into solitary confinement, the recidivism rates rise to at least 75%. So prior to committing a crime and being arrested, detecting mental health conditions start at home and at school. The front line to detecting mental illness is generally the parents or the schools. And inadequate parenting can lead to parents ignoring symptoms or signs of problems with their children. But sometimes it's the parents themselves who are causing children to have mental health issues. For example, if they abuse their children, it'll cause them to have mental disorders such as anxiety or major depressive disorder. Or it could be a combination of both. And if parents So schools also have the obligation to protect children and to help them refer to resources that may help them if the children show troubling signs. And when children break school rules or if they break the law, some schools will immediately have children arrested instead of trying to deal with the issues at school, like in the classroom or at the principal's office. And when schools take the step, it can sometimes start a lifetime cycle of going in and out of the system. And this is usually how it starts for many people, unfortunately. So there are many opportunities to deter mental or to deter mentally ill juveniles from committing crimes so that they don't have to enter the juvenile justice system. So mental illness is a challenge to diagnose today in children. Intervention by parents and schools are inadequate most of the time, and they don't and parents and schools sometimes don't fulfill the duties that they are responsible for, such as finding out if the child has a mental illness. And there's a large amount of juvenile delinquents that are in detention facilities that could be in school getting an education. So teaching parents the cues of mental illness would greatly reduce juvenile delinquency, as they can intervene before conditions with their children before it becomes worse. By requiring parents to sit with their child's pediatrician and psychologists, they can be taught the signs and symptoms of mental disorders that they might not know. And if parents can detect that their child has a form of mental illness, they can intervene by providing their children with therapies such as cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a very effective type of solution. And this therapy is specifically for youth with various types of depressive and anxiety disorders. And it teaches youth awareness of social cues, and it promotes delaying problem solving and non-aggressive responding strategies. So by providing parents with the education along with the resources such as cognitive behavioral therapy for their children, it can prevent the juvenile justice system from growing. And if the parents are unable to provide for their children, it should be a requirement of the school system to help adolescents instead. Some schools across the United States have the habit of having students arrested if they act out in school. And this action that some schools take never really help with the development of children. It only hurts them. And these types of schools are the pipelines for juveniles to enter the juvenile justice system. And by sending them to correctional facilities, they will not receive the proper mental help that they need. What schools should be doing instead is that they should be required to have crisis intervention teams for youth with mental illness. So right now, a handful of schools already have intervention teams set up, but not all of them have it, even though it's a very useful resource. Crisis intervention team programs were developed by communities in order to address the school to prison pipeline. And it allows for diversion and referral of adolescents with mental health disorders for services. Having these specialized teams in schools would greatly improve the future of our children and our society. And by adding this resource to schools, it would prevent juveniles from being arrested and getting the mental help they very much need. Another issue that needs to be addressed is the lack of funding in mental health resources. So, with the examples I've talked about, if those programs received more government funding, they could work and be very effective, especially the crisis intervention teams. So if every school in the United States received funding only to be used for crisis intervention teams, less and less mentally unstable juveniles would commit crimes. And another major area that needs more funding is the correctional facilities themselves. Many facilities inadequately help children they inadequately help children with mental disorders. So by giving these institutions more funds, they would be able to hire more doctors and psychologists to assist in intervention. Adding funding could also generate new programs that would treat children with mental disorders, which could subsequently reduce recidivism rates. So, if it's too late for parents or schools to intervene and treat the children, and those children are sent to detentional facilities, they won't get the help that they need. Well, in detention facilities, they also have multi-systematic therapy, and this should be required as a part of the probationary program, which it's not always required. It's specifically designated for those with emotional and behavioral conditions, and multi-systematic therapy fits treatment with identified causal factors and correlating factors of delinquency and substance use. This type of therapy is an intense family-based approach, which has demonstrated a reduction in rearrest rates of up to 70%. This type of community-based therapy is a very effective approach when it comes to dealing with juveniles who have a mental disorder. Studies have shown that this specific therapy is the most effective when dealing with youth with mental disorders. And in the past couple of decades, the increase in juvenile delinquency has seemingly revolved around mental health issues. And with the uptick in crimes committed by juveniles, it appears that the issue of juvenile delinquency is not getting better at all. And some could argue that the trend might not be going up. Rather, in the past, there was more hidden delinquency, which is just juvenile delinquency that is not reported to authorities. But with all arguments aside, we should focus on what's going on in modern day United States. So by educating parents and creating crisis intervention teams, we could help our youth we could help stop our youth from committing crimes by getting them the help that they truly need. And if it's too late to help them, and if it is too late to help them before they fall victim to detention, efforts should be made to try and help children post-incarceration. So community-based therapy such as multi-systemic therapy, multi-systemic therapy could be highly beneficial in reducing recidivism rates by getting the mental health treatment needed by at-risk youth. The issue dragging down supplying parents with knowledge and creating more and better programs for the mentally ill is the financial cost to it. With the lack of funds in juvenile detention centers that are allotted, many of these places cannot afford supplying the adequate needs to help fix the mental health crisis. In order to fix this epidemic, it would be very helpful if the government created a fund specifically to help educate the public and to create new programs regarding mental health of juveniles. If mental illness in juveniles cannot be fixed we'll just continue to see the prison population grow in the United States. And the United States already has the largest prison population in the world. So, as a country, we should just focus on protecting the youth by getting them the mental health they need, whether it be cognitive based therapy or multi-systemic therapy. So